The average Chinese citizen earned less than someone living in war-torn Somalia. Fast forward to today, and China constructs more infrastructure in a single year than most nations achieve in an entire decade. So what changed? What really happened between then and now? This is the story nobody tells you when they talk about China's economic miracle. Most people think it was just cheap labor and mass production. The truth, it's far more extraordinary, and honestly, almost impossible to believe. We're looking at the fastest mass escape from poverty in recorded human history. 800 million people lifted from extreme poverty in just 4 decades. Imagine taking the entire population of Europe from destitution to middle class in less than 2 generations. That's what China accomplished, and it all began with one man. A man who was purged from power twice, survived a brutal revolution, and returned to completely revolutionize how an entire nation functioned. Let me take you back to China in 1978. This wasn't just poverty. This was a nation where millions had literally starved to death just years earlier. The average annual income was $156. Not per month, per year. You'll probably spend more than that on streaming subscriptions. Under Mao Zedong's leadership, China attempted something called the Great Leap Forward in the late 1950s. The vision was to transform China into an industrial giant overnight. The reality, it became one of history's worst man-made catastrophes. Between 15 and 55 million people died, most from starvation. Farmers were forced to abandon their fields to produce steel in backyard furnaces. Crops rotted. People starved. It was an unmitigated disaster. When Mao died in 1976, China was economically shattered. The nation produced less steel than Belgium. Belgium, a country you could drive across in 2 hours. China had a quarter of the world's population, but generated barely 2% of global GDP. Today, they produce roughly 18%. The countryside was trapped in a medieval existence. No electricity in most villages, no running water, farmers using tools identical to those their great-grandparents had used centuries before. The cities weren't much better. Everyone wore identical blue or gray mouse suits, because that's all that existed. No private businesses, no foreign investment, no personal freedom to even choose your career. The government assigned you a job. That was your life. This is where our story's protagonist enters the stage. Deng Xiaoping. Deng stood barely 5 feet tall, but this man had endured horrors that would have destroyed most people. He'd been purged from the Communist Party twice, during Mao's Cultural Revolution. Red Guards threw his son out of a window, paralyzing him for life. Deng himself was sent to work in a tractor factory as punishment, but he survived, and he came back. When Deng seized power in 1978, he was 74 years old. Most people that age are planning retirement. Deng was planning how to rescue 1 billion people from poverty, and he had a strategy that contradicted everything communist China had ever stood for. He said something that would become one of the most significant statements in modern economic history. It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Translation: he didn't care if an idea was capitalist or a communist. If it worked, China would implement it. This was revolutionary thinking. Remember, this was the People's Republic of China. Private. Enterprise was considered evil. Profit was a dirty word. But Deng examined the data and reached a simple conclusion. The system was failing. People were starving. Change was necessary. Deng understood he couldn't transform China into a capitalist nation overnight. That would terrify the old guard communists who still held significant power. So he developed a brilliant compromise. Special economic zones. Think of them as capitalism laboratories inside a communist state. In 1980, China designated 4 cities: Assisi, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, Shantou, and Xi'an. These cities operated under different rules. Foreign companies could invest, private businesses could function, people could own property. Capitalism was legal, but only in these contained zones. Let me tell you about Shenzhen, because what happened there defies belief. In 1979, Shenzhen was a fishing village of 30,000 people. Dirt roads, no buildings taller than 3 stories. Nothing. Today, Shenzhen has over 12 million residents. It's China's technology capital. It manufactures more smartphones, drones, and electronics than almost anywhere on the planet. In 40 years, it transformed from rice paddies to a skyline that looks like science fiction made real. The CESC experiment succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. China opened more zones. By the 1990s, Entire coastal regions operated under these special conditions. But here's the critical part. Deng didn't simply copy Western capitalism, he invented something entirely new. The government retained ownership of major industries and all land, but private companies could operate, hire, fire, and keep profits. Foreign corporations could build factories, though they often had to partner with Chinese firms. It was capitalism with Chinese characteristics, a hybrid nobody had ever attempted at this scale. Before China could become a manufacturing powerhouse, it needed to fix agriculture. And this is where the story gets really interesting, because the revolution started from the bottom up, not top down. In 1978, in a small village in Anhui province, 18 farmers held a secret meeting. They signed a contract agreeing to divide communal farmland among themselves. Each family would farm their own plot and keep what they produced. This was completely illegal. If discovered, they could face execution. But they were desperate. The result? Their harvest that year exceeded the previous 5 years. Combined, that word spread like wildfire. Other villagers started doing the same. Eventually, the practice became so widespread that Deng had no choice but to make it official policy. By 1980, China had dismantled the commune system that had existed for decades. This was transformational. When farmers could keep what they grew exponentially more. Agricultural output exploded. Between 1978 and 1984, it increased by over 60% in just 6 years. This accomplished two critical things. First, people stopped starving. Second, it freed millions of workers to leave farms and work in factories. Perfect timing for what happened next. In the 1980s and 90s, Western corporations were searching for cheaper manufacturing locations. Japan had become too expensive. South Korea was rising but still costly. Then they looked at China. China offered three massive advantages. First, hundreds of millions of workers willing to accept very low wages. Second, a government that would construct roads, ports, and power plants wherever companies needed them. Third, special economic zones, where foreign firms could operate with minimal restrictions and reduced taxes. Western companies flooded in. Nike, Apple, Sony, they all built factories in China or contracted with Chinese manufacturers. But here's what most people miss. China didn't accept remaining just a cheap labor. Pulled out Chinese companies observed, learned, and started doing it themselves. Initially, they produced cheap imitations, but they improved rapidly. The government played a crucial role. They identified strategic industries they wanted to dominate. Electronics, solar panels, high-speed rail, telecommunications. Then they did everything possible to help Chinese companies win in those sectors. Subsidies, cheap loans, protection from foreign competition domestically, forced technology transfers. Some call this cheating. Others call it strategic industrial policy. Either way, it worked. By the 2000s, China wasn't just making cheap toys anymore. They were producing computers, smartphones, automobiles, and sophisticated technology. The phrase "made in China" evolved from meaning low-quality junk to meaning everything. Today, China manufactures approximately 28% of all goods worldwide. They produce more steel than every other country combined. More cement, more solar panels, more electric vehicles. It's staggering. And this isn't about cheap labor anymore. Chinese wages have increased dramatically. So why do companies still manufacture their? Because China built something no other nation possesses. A complete industrial ecosystem. Imagine you want to manufacture a new smartphone. In China, you can find a factory producing screens within 50 miles. Another making batteries. Another making cameras. Another producing chips. Another handling final assembly. They're all connected by efficient highways and world-class ports. If something malfunctions, or you need a design modification, you can have someone at the factory within an hour. Try coordinating that if your screen supplier is in Japan, your battery manufacturer is in South Korea, and your assembly is in Vietnam. It's a logistical nightmare. China also has millions of engineers and skilled workers. If you need to hire 10,000 people to scale production, you can accomplish it in weeks. Try hiring 10,000 skilled workers anywhere else that quickly. It's impossible. This ecosystem took decades to construct and is nearly impossible to replicate rapidly. It's China's ultimate competitive advantage. What China created is something economists call state capitalism. It's not pure socialism, because private companies and markets exist. But it's not pure capitalism either, because the state controls key industries. directs investment, and can crush any company that becomes too independent. The largest companies in China are state-owned enterprises, SOEs. They control banking, energy, telecommunications, and transportation. These companies receive preferential loans from state banks, favorable treatment from regulators, and protection from competition. But private companies exist too, and some became massive: Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei. Tech giants rivaling American corporations. This model proved incredibly effective for rapid industrialization. When the government decides to build something, it hits build. No endless debates, no lawsuits, no environmental studies dragging on for years. They just execute. High-speed rail perfectly illustrates this. In 2008, China had virtually no high-speed rail. Today, they have more than the entire rest of the world combined. Over 25,000 miles, built in less than 15 years. Could this model work elsewhere? That's the trillion-dollar question. Some countries are attempting to copy it. Others argue it only succeeded because of China's unique circumstances: massive population, authoritarian government, and perfect timing. Because the state controls key industries, directs investment, and can crush any company that becomes too independent. The largest companies in China are state-owned enterprises. They control banking, energy, telecommunications, and transportation. These companies receive preferential loans from state banks, favorable treatment from regulators, and protection from competition. But private companies exist too, and some became massive: Alibaba, Tencent, Huawei, tech giants, rivaling American corporations. This model proved incredibly effective for rapid industrialization. When the government decides to build something, it gets built. No endless debates, no lawsuits, no environmental studies dragging on for years. They just execute. High-speed rail perfectly illustrates this. In 2008, China had virtually no high-speed rail. Today, they have more than the entire rest of the world combined. Over 25,000 miles, built in less than 15 years. Could this model work elsewhere? That's the trillion-dollar question. Some countries are attempting to copy it. Others argue it only succeeded because of China's unique circumstances: massive population, authoritarian government, and perfect timing. Let me give you some numbers, because they're almost incomprehensible. In 1978, China's GDP was $150 billion. Today, it exceeds 17 trillion. That's more than 100 times larger. In 1978, 88% of Chinese people lived in extreme poverty. Today, it's less than 1%. Life expectancy jumped from 66 years to 78 years. Literacy rate soared from 66% to over 97%. In 1978, China received essentially zero foreign investment. Today, they're among the world's largest recipients of foreign capital, and they're investing trillions abroad through initiatives like the Belt and Road. They transformed from producing 2% of global manufacturing to 28%. Chinese tourists went from virtually non-existent to spending over $250 billion abroad annually before the pandemic. China graduates more STEM students each year than the United States, India, and Japan combined. These aren't incremental improvements. This is total transformation in a single generation. China's rise changed everything. Global supply chains flow through China. Your phone, laptop, clothes, probably half the items in your house were manufactured there, or contain components made there. It shifted geopolitical power. For 2 centuries, the West dominated. Now there's a genuine competitor. The United States is deeply concerned, which explains all the talk about trade wars and rising tensions. It also demonstrated that perhaps there's more than one path to prosperity. The Western model insisted you need democracy and free markets to achieve wealth. China said, "Watch this," and did it with an authoritarian government and economy. Whether that's positive or negative depends on who you ask. But it's undeniably changed the global conversation about development, power, and the future. The dragon was broken. The dragon rebuilt itself, and now the dragon is rewriting the rules. If this story revealed something you never knew about how the modern world actually works, hit that like button and subscribe to Axis Lens. We uncover the stories that change how you see everything. The next one drops soon. You won't want to miss it.